Wait, what episode is this, Julian?
Five, fifth.
We've done 5 weeks of this now.
Yeah, a
Pretty
full
impressive.
month.
Pretty
Yep.
impressive.
Yeah, I had to renew the Zoom free membership, and I actually had to pay so that we're going to be able to continue going.
Look at this, eh? We're heavily
Yeah.
invested now into
Yeah.
this. 14.99 a month. Beast.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one is different, guys. Right now, I'm down in just outside of Atlanta in Georgia, staying with Cameron. For those of you guys who don't know Cameron, he is an exceptional coach, prep coach. I think you do lifestyle guys too. I would say up and coming because he's so young, but he's been doing this for some time now. So this is the first episode we've had actual, pretty high level coach on. So we're gonna hopefully get some inside info from Cam, and then also talk a little bit about, or a lot, I don't know, about my own prep for Toronto
We're
coming
not
up. And
making,
I don't even know how many days now I'm so relaxed down here.
yeah, we're not making this about you anyways, Blake.
No,
So,
no, let's not. I've been
um,
trying to make this podcast about me for the past 5 weeks, and we keep going in different directions.
so obviously Blake Cam has been your coach for what, 2 years now? A year and a half?
So after the Olympia, 2022, it was late in the year. It was like December.
Yeah.
Did that, and then went my separate ways with Pat, and reached out to Cam when I was on vacation, actually in Florida. And
Coach
then
hopped right over here.
Yeah.
right when we got in contact, I actually drove up to like the old Revive gym. Well, I guess it's still there probably, but the Revive gym in Stewart, and we got a workout in and chatted things over, and we did a long off season, and yeah, this will be the first time that we compete together.
Okay. So first, Cam, obviously, I want to thank you for being there and for being your
Sure.
first, as Blake said, high-level coach guest. Uh, I feel like obviously Blake knows you. Uh, I feel like I don't know you all that much, and I'm close to Matt, which kind of makes me know you a bit.
Sure.
But I don't think most people, Canadian competitors, know you a whole lot, even though like your name pops here and there more and more. But I don't think most people kind of know like where you're from, how you started, or like where like how your trajectory has been. So I don't know if you can kind of talk us into like how you started, what made you go from like being what we could consider like a mid-range type of coach to just being like with more like high-level clients. Uh,
Sure.
whatever you feel like makes sense.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me on, and I'll try and dive into it without going too far off. So yeah, I'm prep coach. I live basically in Atlanta, Georgia. I've lived in Georgia my whole life. Um, just turned 26 years old, so I'm a little bit younger. But this will be my sixth season as a coach. So I've been doing this for a little over half a decade now. I grew up playing sports my whole life, played football. I was on the offensive line, so I was a little bit overweight. That then kind of led into, my first initial like weight loss journey, and then kind of starting to help a couple of my buddies that I played with also lose weight. That tied to some personal training. At 19, I unexpectedly had my son. I guess his mother had him, and I was the father of that child. So that put me in kind of a rocky situation for a couple years as I was kind of just having to grow up really fast. And I did get into coaching as more of just a means to, kind of make an income and survive and pay my child support. Out the gate, I was introduced to a roommate who was really knowledgeable when it came to exercise science. He pointed me in a lot of the directions of people to look up to. You know him, Paulie. And so he pointed me in the right direction for people to, listen to podcasts about, and who, had good information. Um, and that trend of just being around really opportunistic just mentors such as Matt Jansen, and there's a handful of others that I've been peers with throughout learned a ton with. I got some really great opportunities. My first season coaching, just really hit it off well. The first athlete I put on stage won an overall at a regional show. The second competed at Universe. He got his pro card in men's physique. The third one won an overall at a natural show, and he got his pro card in bodybuilding as a natural. It was like a natural show. And then the third one, she won an overall at a regional show, then went to North Americans and won her class. So those were like the first, 4 or 5 showings that I had.
Nice.
And out the gate, just holding a really high standard and reputation, I realized it was an opportunity like, hey, this is like how I can kind of just introduce myself to this industry. And I have an opportunity here to, really establish footing in my own ground in a sense. And so I just continued my best job to maintain that high standard throughout, being really picky with who I was putting on stage, really pushing people to elevate their own standard that I was coaching, and then pushing myself to continue to get better and learn more. And I think that alone just continued to snowball into getting more opportunities with people. Early on, I knew that I didn't have the experience. I had only done one show as a competitor myself too. So it was like, I can go hard for my people. I can communicate really well, and I can show people I care. And that doesn't take, buckets of experience and a ton of knowledge to do.
I
Okay.
think interestingly enough to that point is like Cam with me and like how I've seen him work with others is basically like he'll be the first one to tell you like you're not ready for this show or you need to make improvements in order to be successful to do this. Where I think a lot of coaches will just take someone on and if they have like a 10-week out timeline, they're going to do that whether it's the right move or not. And even like for myself, I wanted to compete so bad last year, and I
Yeah.
kept coming back to him and I'm telling him like, hey, like I don't know about this long ass off season. Like I think it's getting kind of stale. Like, can we compete? And we get on the phone and he would kind of chat me through it. And just like it's out of his best interest, right? Because to put me on stage is gonna get more attention for
Your
him
best interest, sir.
and my best interest. Yeah, my best interest. But it's just one of those ones where he's full well like trying to figure out ways for the athlete to be the best and not necessarily like just falling down the path of like this is what the person wants and this is what we're gonna do. Which you don't see very often, I don't think.
Okay. So regarding that, I feel like it's something that coaches need to do, but that a lot of like less experienced coach are not comfortable doing, like to tell their clients that they're not ready to do a show. And a lot just go and try to have as many people in a show. Um, I'd like to for you to take us a bit into like your thought process on how you decide like, okay, is my guy ready for that show or is not ready? Do you base that on is he ready to win it or is he ready to just do good? Just like what's your thought process on whether someone is ready, in your opinion, to do a show or not?
Sure. I think that's a great question because I think being ready really varies, one, throughout an athlete's competitive career and experience level, and it just varies across the board from person to person because each individual ceiling is going to be different. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um, tying back to, from the career standpoint, let's say you have someone that's never stepped on stage before.
yeah,
Being ready, I'm not expecting them to have to go into a show and completely win it. Especially some of
yeah,
these athletes that they go into their first show and they're 100% natural and not wanting to touch anything and just kind
yeah,
of feel it out and see how they're going to do. You know what I
yeah,
mean? I don't think that that means that their posing needs to look like they've never done a posing session with a posing coach who have never prepared. I don't think that that means that their conditioning needs to be super off. They're not going to be probably the most perfectly conditioned athlete. But, my first show that I did, I'm 6'1", so I was about 165 pounds on stage.
okay,
So super skinny, but
yeah,
I
for
was
sure.
diced. I
Okay,
was diced and I did posing sessions and I knew that that's like within a 6 month period, I could get peeled and I could, become the best posing athlete that I could at the time,
yeah,
right? I'm not going to put on a ton of size, but that's one of those things where I got second in my class. I was outweighed by everybody in my class by maybe 20, 25 pounds. And the guy that beat me outweighed me by 30, and we were like battling neck and neck simply just off of me having conditioning.
Okay.
Um, once that person has done that first show and truly established, like, okay, I want to be competitive with this. And as a coach, I can start to understand how their physique is shaping up, what their genetic somewhat potential looks like to an extent. From there, you can really start to shape the framework of, okay, does this person really love this? And do they have the tools to, go for a pro card one day? If so, then really they don't have any business stepping on stage again until they're going to be doing another qualifier for their pro qualifier. You know, if there's someone that then at that point has gotten a pro card, it's like, okay, what do you want to get out of this? No,
Yeah.
do we need to have the expectations that you're going to go in and win your pro debut? No, but we don't need to have the expectations of let's just get up there and fall into the third call out because it's a pro debut.
Yeah.
It's like we still want to try and shoot for probably that top 10 spot, if not the top five for some of those more genetically elite people. And then it's like once you've kind of established some footing about probably where you can be within the pro level, at that point, like you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're just jumping back on stage to move up 1 to 2 placings. If you're coming in at like 10th, then you could truly be, a top three in pro shoes at some point. Um, for a coach as well, your eye continues to develop as you start from a beginning coach to then someone that's started to pick up a lot of traction and
Yep.
experience. And I think as that happens too, what you deem as ready changes and improves over time as well. I remember, my first year getting into coaching, I might have looked at someone and thought that they were peeled, or think that maybe like I nailed a peak with somebody. And now I look back and it's like, no, they really weren't peeled. They were in pretty decent good shape. And that peak look actually was flat, and you start to kind of figure out over time, again, like what people's potential is. And it's weird, but it's almost like you could look at someone and see where they can be like 2 to 3 years from now.
Yeah.
And it's just like I can see your shadow from where you're going to be in 3 years. Like we need to get you to that point. And like Blake, for example, he's an Olympian, he's made it to that stage, but you look at someone like him, 2 years ago, and it's like, okay, what was your weight on stage? Like 217. Okay, where's your weight cap? 234.
Yeah.
Okay,
You
how
know,
old
you,
are you? Like 31, 32, you just had a kid. Probably not going to be doing this for, another 5 to 6 years if you guys want to have another kid, right? It's like your time's gold right now. You've got 17 pounds that you can put on. If we just compete again in another year, like you're knocking off maybe 20% what's left of your bodybuilding career, if he does this for another, what, 5 years. So it was really kind of taken into account, like, okay, you tell me that you really want to be one of the top guys and try and maybe break into the top 10 at the O one day. Like, I'm not going to sit here and let you waste your time. And then
yeah.
also, put you in a position where you've shot yourself in the foot, and then maybe 2 3 years from now you have to decide like, oh shit, like we really want to start a family, but like I'm really trying to go hard for bodybuilding. Like I wouldn't want you to feel like you've left stuff on the table or had to pick one or the other.
Nice.
It's like a reverse engineering kind of thing. Like when he broke it down like that to me of like how much time I think I have and like how to maximize that time with bodybuilding, it was like a lot clearer of a vision for me to like how to improve. Because before, like, I started competing 2016 and I was just consistently doing show after show
Yeah.
after show and like having success at shows, but not necessarily like making huge strides like show to show. And, I know Julian, you're in the same camp as like it takes like for most people a significant amount of time in an off season at a surplus to make like those
For
big
sure.
changes on stage. The only way you could maybe do that is if, you really missed a peak or something, or like, you didn't get in shape and like you want
Yeah.
to get back on stage to like show what you have now. But in order to take those next steps, it's like that was the thought process I really liked was like, how much time do you have left doing this? Like, how can we maximize it to be the best version of yourself? And like for me, like when we had the chat originally, it wasn't like to be like the most successful, like face or like marketable person. It was like, how can I have the most success at like a pure bodybuilding level?
Yeah.
Because I think as I look back later in life, like I'll be more proud of like my accomplishments on stage than I would be like trying to chase like, attention and stuff like that. And like being like, because last year, like I had like nothing going on, you get fat in the off season, like your pictures look like shit, like nobody's really cares about what you're
Yeah.
doing. But it's like being able to go through that to make those improvements, to be in a position now where it's like, I'm super excited with kind of where we've gotten to, and you know, the extra size I think is really gonna pan out well.
Yeah, because
For
it's
sure.
also like a bigger kind of surprise when you go back on stage, because obviously the changes are going to be bigger. So it's not like it's kind of the same, but just a tiny bit better. Like you do expect a big difference from the previous showing, right?
It's a fear though, right? Because in the
Yeah,
off season, like you don't know, like you're kind of like, like, I have this size, but is it water, is it fat, is it whatever? But the big difference that I've noticed, at least through this prep, was just that, like, with the communication between the two of us, there's been like so many times of like putting your foot on the gas and then taking it off. Whereas like
yeah,
in the past with like Patrick brought me in peeled every time. I had nothing but success with him, but he would just like drive me into the ground,
yeah,
and then like right at the end we would add food in and like, peak for the stage. But this has been a lot different where it's been like gradual down, a lot of food back up, back down, back up. And like I think it's been a way for me to hang on to a lot like more tissue than like over dieting and like kind of giving up good training, giving up sleep, giving up, having all this extra stress. Um, so for me, definitely that was an advantage as well, in order to like maintain size throughout.
uh Cam, I just want to come back to something you said, that like the more experience you gain, the more your kind of expectations of what is ready to be on stage changes, right?
Hmm.
uh and it's something I've noticed with myself. Do you feel like the more high level guys you're coaching, the less you're satisfied with like the lower level guys, because you feel like for me, for example, I'm like more often than not feeling like, well, I know he could be more peeled because I've seen so many people leaner. I know he could be way bigger because I've seen way more people bigger. And you kind of not stop knowing, but are less satisfied with like a lower kind of look, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that experience that you gain with your eye and the way that your standard, I guess, for your own self as a coach and the product, I think that that raises across the board.
Yeah,
Because you still, for me, I still take into account, I understand each individual's like genetic potential. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Like the ceiling for someone that could get their pro card and maybe open bodybuilding, like you can tell those people from an early age are like meant to put on size and muscle. You know what I mean? Like their
yeah,
body holds it really well. Like they're making crazy gains off, maybe moderate doses in a pretty quick amount of time, and they don't, they're not feeling awful as their weight's getting
yeah,
up that heavy. And so you kind of start to piece together what that long-term vision is with each athlete. But I would say, as your eye develops and you get better and better and your own standard improves, that end goal just becomes a little bit more refined. Or
yeah,
maybe, an off season like peak weight and body composition becomes refined a little bit and it's
yeah,
more cleaned up. Or a peak gets a little bit more detail to it, or that fine conditioning mark gets a little bit more detailed. I would say for as a coach, as I've gotten better and worked with higher level individuals, my I'm a competitive person by nature, and
yeah,
so I'm not an athlete that competes on stage, but I have my own competitive internal, I guess, battles that I always try and win with just continually becoming better as a coach.
yeah,
And so I do recognize over time as I work with higher level individuals that those that maybe their potential and ceiling for where they can go isn't necessarily continuing to elevate me as a coach for pushing me to higher and higher places. And I would say that maybe there's a little bit of dissatisfaction within that, but it still doesn't leave a complete open gap because I'm
Yeah.
seeing people reach goals that, I'm holding them to a high standard
Yeah.
for their individual self. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Do you find, Cam, like when you're having those conversations with people that like at times maybe you get someone that's a bit delusional in terms of like what they think for themselves, and you have to kind of like have that hard, like, you might not be built for this particular class, or might not be ready at this particular moment. Like for Sarah, like my wife, she she competed at one show. She won her class. She looked phenomenal. And then she went to James Atlas, who I don't know, you probably know James
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And she said, like, what do you think about me competing like long term naturally? And he said, like, there's absolutely no way that you will turn pro with your genetics naturally. Like he just said it flat out. And at the time, she was kind of like, oh man, like she really took it personally, And she
For
came to me
sure.
with it, and I'm like, what a fucking dick, right? But then over time, like we kind of realized like he was just right, Like in
Yeah.
order to like how do you approach those types of conversations with someone that comes to you, and like do you kind of guide it, or are they kind of like, this is what I think, and then you kind of temper those expectations?
For sure. Well, with her, like, I think it's natural for her to probably take it personal. You know what I mean? On the other side of the coin, what if a coach came to you, or if I came to you and I was like, bro, your genetics are so good, you'll never have to take another drug and we're going to go win the Olympia. You know what I mean? You'd be like, oh shit, hell yeah, I'm taking that personal. I'm taking that one to heart. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's understandable for an athlete to feel that way in the moment, but as a coach, it's our job to, have those uncomfortable conversations. It's not like he sat there and said like, no, you need to take this. It's like if you want to go there,
Yeah.
you'll probably have to, and it still gives the athlete that option to decide like, what risk am I willing to take, never going pro and never winning, staying natural, or taking some drugs and dealing with some side effects. Um, but yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. You know what I mean? And it's a conversation that it can look different from person to person because you have to understand each individual and how they're going to hear it. You don't want to take away any kind of self-belief from an athlete. And there might even be some situations where someone's so early into their career, it's like, you might prove me wrong. Or like if an athlete
Hmm.
says like, oh, I want to compete in, X amount of weeks, it's like, okay, I don't think that that's really going to happen, but like if it's really that important, like let's push and we'll make a judgment call it like 6 weeks out or so. It could be a situation like that. But I mean, I've even had individuals where, they've ran cycles and their genetics for their response is not that great. Like they're not putting on a ton of muscle. They don't really have great bone structure. And then we get labs back and their labs are like taking hits from cycles that they shouldn't even be taking hits from. And at that point, I've even told people like, hey man, like I don't think this sport is for you. Like,
Hmm.
I'm not, and it's super uncomfortable conversations. And I think every person I've told that I don't coach anymore. But at the same time too, it's just like, dog, like, you're a buck 70 and your EGFR touched into the 60s after not even using a gram per week for this whole cycle. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and just keep telling you like, oh, we're just gonna have to take more than, or like just keep doing it because it's like, at best, what are you gonna do? Run drugs for a decade and go win an overall to regional show? Maybe.
Hmm.
Like, there's some people that probably will want to know, like, damn, like, I wish someone would have told me that that's what I would get out of this after doing this for 10 years. You know what I mean? So it's tough, and like, you don't necessarily have to completely, go that hard into telling somebody that, but, lining up the expectations, if someone's not ready for a national show, or, I've even told people that maybe they wanted to do bikini or they wanted to do figure, and I had to tell them like, hey, like you're probably not ever going to go pro in that division. Like I think you're going to have a better shot at being competitive in another division that fits your structure. gone about it in that way before too. But yeah, I think it's very, very common to see in the sport with athletes not being delusional, but almost just not being realistic with the true expectations. And most don't truly understand like the level of work that it goes into this and the level of genetics that go into being a top athlete too.
Do you feel that it's the guys or the girls that are more setting expectations that are not really realistic?
Definitely the guys.
The guys?
Yeah, definitely the guys.
So I'm guessing they're the one that take it more personal
More
also.
ego driven, probably.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was one girl that I coached, maybe it was my second year of coaching. So like I held this standard high with people pretty early out the gate. And I remember telling her like, hey, like we're gonna need to pull out of the prep. Like we're not gonna make it in time for this show. And like, you got to tell this to people that have probably been busting their ass because you're trying to make it for this timeline. And I remember her being like, oh, you don't believe in me. And I'm like, no, I don't believe in this timeline. Like, and I
Yeah.
remember seeing her go on social media and she'd be like posting her post-workout photos, like, I've had people doubt me and, last coach that didn't believe in me, and it's just like stage shots agree with it. So, you know, but at the same time too, it's just like that's our job as a coach. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
the uncomfortable conversations come with it too. You can't dance around them or they're gonna show themselves.
I want to quickly touch on the Matt Jansen thing too, because Julian is a friend of Matt's, and there's some connection there. But like, is it something where like he noticed that success that you had early on, and like, maybe started getting in touch with you at that point, or was it something that like, you were familiar with him because obviously at that point, like you weren't like deep in the industry. Like how did that relationship form and what does it look like even kind of to today? Like, do you have conversations back and forth with him about maybe some of your particular athletes or what he's doing with his athletes? And if you just touch on
Sure. So I originally knew who he was because there was a guy competing in the same show as me in 2018, and he was eating Chick-fil-A backstage, and I was like, "Yo, how'd this guy get Chick-fil-A?" And I started talking to him, and he ended up winning the overall in bodybuilding that day too. And so I think that's how I came across him. Like I really didn't even know what bodybuilding was until 2018. And so that's how I came across him. When I was first into coaching, my first season was 2019. I would reach out to all different coaches and ask questions. I'd shoot emails, I'd send Instagram DMs, I'd offer to just pay them for their time. And Matt, he used to live in Georgia, about an hour away from me. And I knew Jacoby more than I knew Matt, or I knew of them. But I had like more people that were mutual friends with Jacoby. And so I think that through my first year of coaching, I remember just having people conversations with people that I coached, that maybe they talked with Jacoby, and like I knew that he knew who I was. Matt and Justin trained together as well. And I think there was one time I remember like someone like talking to them at the gym and like Matt saying something about like, oh, like Cameron's got you looking good or something like that. And I was just like, he knows who I am. You know what I mean? Um, and then what was it? I think it was 2021. Yeah, I think it was 2021. We knew each other very briefly because in April of 21, I went down to Revive for the first time, and that was initially when I signed with them. And so I just briefly met him down there at the gym. Um, and then I remember that summer, I just emailed him and I was like, "Hey man, I know you're a super busy guy." I still have the email on my in my inbox too. Like I usually clean out my whole entire
You keep
inbox,
it
and I've
there.
still got that one there where like I introduced myself, paid my respects to him, and then basically was just like, I would love to pick your brain about something, pay you for your time, on peaking actually. And it was around the time that Brett did the Chicago Pro, and battled it up with Hunter.
Under, yeah.
And so I felt like that's really when Matt's peaking really like started amplifying. That was the same year that Nick Walker did the Arnold and won it. And so I was just like, this dude's bringing the same look every single
Yeah.
time. Like, I want to know what he's doing. And he responded back and he was like, hey, let me get back with you and think on this. And then I just randomly got another email from him like the next day or so. And he was like, honestly, man, I've been thinking about it. I'd love to be more like a long-term mentor role for you. And so I was just like, dude, all right. And so, I paid him for calls and his time, and it eventually just turned into a friendship. And I had a team that I owned with a couple coaches under me throughout 2021 and then into 2022. And at that time, like I still wanted to continue to pay my respects as a coach, and having a team with coaches under me required different levels of responsibilities and things that weren't just one-on-one coaching. And so I forgo having my own team at the time so that way I knew if it came down to, me having to do stuff to manage a team with other coaches, or like diving in and learning more and like applying myself more as a coach, I was going to pick coaching. So I ended up reaching out to Matt and I was like, I don't know if you guys are looking to bring any people onto Camp Jansen. But I'd love to be a part of something much bigger than myself. And he was like, honestly, there's nobody else I'd love to bring on than you.
Who
And
was
so it kind of
so,
just,
sorry, Cam, who was there at that time? It was just Berzakot and Jacoby, right?
yeah, so that was around fall of 2022. So
Okay.
that was right before Berzakot had left.
Yeah.
And it was just Matt and Jacoby. Um, and then yeah, so started then and have been on since.
I wonder, like, too, if I don't know if you've faced this or like heard things about it, but like this is gonna sound like bad for me, but like when I first saw you,
Like,
I was like, this guy looks you just look so young to me. And I'm like, at that point in time, I'm like, how much like can this guy possibly know? Like I just didn't have like again, it's a judgmental thing, right? I didn't know you at the
sure.
time.
I mean,
I
it's
just see
fair.
just see pictures of you. And then there was like maybe a year of time. I saw that you did the Camp Jansen thing, and then I just started noticing like, your guys were looking good
Guy puts
every single
out.
time, you know? And it was actually Quentin at the time who was like hyping you up a little bit and saying like, I really like the look that like Cam's bringing to certain people. He was sending me some pictures and that was sort of like what planted the seed in my head of like having an eventual conversation with you. But like, did you ever have that at the beginning where people were like, "Why should I listen to you?" Like you were so young when you started, Like when you think of like a coaching like the guru level guys, they're all like 50 plus, right? Like nobody's
Cito,
even
yeah.
close to low 20s. So I wonder if that's something that you maybe faced like directly, or maybe it's just like myself where I was just judging you because you were younger.
No, I mean, I think it's fair though. You know what I mean? Like you're coming to a guy that's in his early 20s. He's not like some jacked giant bodybuilder himself too. And I knew that going into things, even because my first season that I was coaching, I was 20 years old. I couldn't even buy alcohol yet. And like I knew it and I was very aware of it. I would go to some shows and like I'd be like, hey, is this where you get the coaches pass? And they'd be like, dude, tickets are over there. You know what I mean? And that was that same show that girl went in and won the overall and figure and went and won it at North America, like destroyed some show in Tennessee. And that was the first time I was just like, damn, wow. And it's one of those things where it's like I can't sit here and argue that like, at the time like that I've worked with all these crazy people and I've been there myself and I know what it's like because I couldn't. So I just knew at the time that it was like the only word I have to stand on is my production and the work that I do. So when I first got into things, I would try and be a little bit more informative on stuff on my social media to like kind of give some value to show that I knew what I was talking about. I just don't have as much time for it anymore or care to, I guess.
Well,
But
you
I knew
don't.
the biggest. Huh.
You don't need to anymore though, because like
Yeah,
your resume has like adds credibility now. So
for sure. And so I just knew like all I can do is just ball out with the people I have, and like some of those athletes that they weren't going to go in pro cars, it was like, well, damn, if I bring in somebody that's absolutely peeled to the stage that obviously doesn't have the greatest genetics, like somebody out there with genetics that hasn't gotten in shape is going to be like, if he can get that guy peeled, he can get me peeled. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um, I don't think I ever directly had conversations where they were like, why should I trust you? But
yeah.
I said all of that to say that I'm sure that those were probably thoughts that had gone through people's minds that eventually kind of helped answer that question for them.
I think it's pretty cool, and like you must have like a lot of admiration for like early on clients that like trusted you, that ended up having that type of success. Like I think Jarek was like the first, I don't want to say like,
He hired me one
yeah,
month before the first athlete I put on stage. So he was like the first pro that was on my roster.
because like I'm the type of guy where like I need to see it first. Like I'm not probably
Yeah,
not
I
gonna
mean, I
have a
would be
call with you
too.
and like you're like, yeah, I've coached like one figure girl, and I'm like, all right, let's do it, But people did it, and like it's a testament to like what opportunity can do, right? Because it's like you just need that like one person who like has the tools, and if you like nail it with them, then like it opens up the floodgates, right? Like all of a sudden,
Sure.
you have someone that starts to take off and whatever, and everybody's wanting to like we talked about this early on, Cam. Like a lot of coaching right now is like the hot hand. Like
It
Julian,
always is,
we were
yeah.
talking about like even like Stefan or whatever, like the boss of Outlaw. It's like all of a sudden this guy's got like every like he's picking up everyone, and it's just because like he has success with one guy and it just like goes wildfire. But like um I think obviously you do have to nail it. And if you miss, and that's like a big thing with like the Jansen thing, right? Like if you miss, you give up that opportunity and like you really have so that's why it's like you got to set up the like you're not ready or like I think this is the
Sure.
right date for you because if you don't do those things, you're just setting yourself up for like for failure for future clients. And I think that's where a lot of coaches might make the mistake. It's like they're just taking an income and putting anybody on stage and it's like quantity over quality and that never like lasts like through the test of time, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, that hot hand thing, I mean, it's very real. You know what I mean? Like it definitely happens. Like I do have a lot of admiration for the people, like Elias, for example. He did his first show also in 2018. He hired me my first year that I was coaching in 2019 because he was local to me. But he wasn't any freak at the time. Like he didn't have a physique that says like, oh, I deserve to go hire a top tier coach. He was also like maybe 21 years old at the time. And he stuck it out with me from 2019 all the way until 2023 last year. And the first show we did together, he had gone, I don't know, he probably put on like 80 pounds of muscle and went and won the overall at his regional as a super heavy and then won his class at North Americans as a super heavy. And it was like that was our first season together after working together for 4 years straight. And honestly, that showing was probably one of like the most rewarding that I've had in my whole career because it was like, damn, dude, like we started together at the beginning. Like you knew me like when I was struggling and like living paycheck to paycheck, and like you were there from the very beginning. And like like I almost still remember the consult call that we had where he was the one of the ones where it was like, yeah, I want to go pro as a bodybuilder. And I always remember it stuck with me when I first moved in with Paul when I was like 19 years old. When I was a competitor, remember I did my show and I was like, I'm gonna go do a national show next year. It was in no place to do that. And he was like, bro, you got to understand that like when he was because Classic was out at that time, he was like, before Classic and 5, 10 years ago, like guys did this for 10 years or so before they finally got on stage. Like there was no Classic, there was no men's physique. Like you had to get huge and get jacked before you even thought about doing a show. And it was like, damn, that's right. Like, you know what I mean? Like you got to put in the time and sweat equity into it to truly be competitive.
I know you touched a bit on like the service aspect and how important that is with like communication, like being there for clients. Would you say that there's anything like I don't want to say like completely specific to you personally, but like methods that you know, sort of prefer or use that is a little bit more, I guess, unique to you in terms of maybe let's just say, I don't know, peaking or building muscle or getting a shape for a show. Like what is like a Cameron Cheek like
A little bit more Gen Z.
yeah. I was gonna say like a black background on check-ins. That's pretty much what
Yeah,
you know you're
man. So like when I first got into it again, like I didn't have the experience like as myself as an athlete and with a lot of other big name athletes for where I was wanting to go. And so it was just like about finding gaps like okay, like eventually I'm going to learn, but what's one small little thing that's going to make them better? What's one small thing that's going to help me with analyzing things? Like, I made those Google Sheets out the gate because I knew that if I kept track of things, I could find where I fucked up and figure out how I fucked up because I knew it was going to happen. And it was just like that organization piece that wasn't something I was seeing. Like I would have coaches that I looked up to and like, I thought the world of, and then I'd have plans come through and I'd be like, damn, like that's it. Like this is really what you're doing, and some of it can probably be over the top that I do too, depending on the individual, but it's all kind of had its rhyme and reason and purpose. And that was one of the biggest things, was just being super organized, keeping track of data. I've learned that some things are overkill and that we don't even need to keep track of. I've learned some things are super crucial, and I've got to teach people how to break out of old ways and get into doing things like this because it does make a really big difference. Um, from a service standpoint, I think that social media has gotten big enough now that it's really not any big brag to say that you respond within 24 hours or anything like that. But always being on top of communication times with people. And the real big thing is just, putting the expectations out there. Like if you know that like you've got a lot of shit going on in your life and it's going to take you 72 hours to respond, tell them that out the gate. You know what I mean? Like they know that it's going to take 72 hours, but you're a good coach and you take care of them and get them what they need, like they're probably going to be okay with it. Um, so I'd say that that's the main thing. I'm sure there's things that I do like over time, I really like to get to understand and know the people and kind of how their gears work. I've started to also realize as a coach that it takes time to be able to truly pour that investment into getting to know them because of this industry and how coach hoppy people can be, and you just got to still protect yourself as a coach and your time and that you're investing in. But that's one thing I really do try and do because I think it makes a big difference in the long run with guiding people.
Something totally unique that I don't think really you see at all is like the fact that I'm here. you know, like that's a pretty different scenario. Like even when I would tell people, they're like, "Wait, you're like 2 weeks out. Like where are you going?" Like is there a show in Atlanta? I'm like, "No, like I'm going down to stay with my coach." And I think people thought that that was pretty cool. But like just the experience of like, for me anyways, like to your point of like kind of understanding the athletes, is like I had so many different things on my plate at home that we felt that like coming down here would be able to allow me to just like the biggest thing I think was like the de-stress and to like
Hmm.
just have the focus particularly on the show, which obviously it was, but there were so many things that kind of revolving around that obviously make it more difficult. And being down here has been like, I just got down here was it Tuesday, yeah. So it's just gonna be like more and more improvements, and but also like it's just been a great experience, honestly. Like it's just you don't get this type of opportunity even like as an athlete. I think as a coach too, right? So
Hmm.
um, that's something that I would say would be for sure unique to what you're doing.
For
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Julian's seen it, but we built that whole posing room upstairs with the
yeah,
mirrors and the stage lighting and stuff like that. And as a coach, like you sit behind a computer screen, at least I do, pretty isolated all the time.
yeah.
So, and I would love to live down in Stewart, but my son lives here in Georgia. So that's why, I'm not down in Florida. But like I would love to be able to be in an environment around, more athletes and more of the bodybuilding scene and stuff like that, but I just don't. So, it's one of those things like I kind of wanted to be able to recreate that a little bit here for
Yeah.
myself. And, too, I know from an athlete standpoint, it can make things easier. Like whenever Jarek did his pro debut in 2020, yeah, it was whenever COVID was going on and they brought the Chicago Pro to Atlanta. I think his daughter was 1 to 2 years old at the time. And so I knew his like home life, it was, high stress and a high responsibility. And so I think at about 2 weeks out, I drove down to Jacksonville and I stayed with him at his house for about a week. I tried to help out around the house where I could just to try and take weight off his shoulders and then also like really learn and see his body in person. And then we drove back up to Atlanta maybe like 4 or 5 days out for the show here in Atlanta. And he got second at his debut. And I felt like over those 2 weeks, like it was huge for his look. And it just there's no almost like transition period in peak week when you travel to the show and like really start to like, okay, this is what their in-person body looks like. These are how
Yeah.
things move in person. You know what I mean? And it's fun too. You don't always get to see your people that you coach and like spend time with them and get to know them. And again, like there's a select few that I would bring into my own home, but being able to do that with an athlete it's a fun experience.
Yeah. See, to me, and it's true that it's not something a lot of coaches do. I feel it's something that Matt has done for a while, right? Like bringing in some of his
For
guys, all that kind of
sure.
stuff. In regard to that, and with you being with Cam Jensen and all that kind of stuff, how much would you say is similar in the way you and Matt and Jacoby coach versus like what's different? Like, kind of like, are you guys kind of all working in similar fashion, or is it way different? Or like, do you have some that you
Yeah.
completely disagree about?
I would say, for the most part, like our premises of how we do things are similar. I've never been coached by Matt and I've never been coached by Justin. But I would say, I mean, I know that you have.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, the way that I've brought Blake down and feed him back up. I'm sure that's probably pretty similar to how you do
Yes.
things too. And your refeeds probably get pretty high. We're all gonna have things that are individual and different. I will say that they don't do things through like the spreadsheets like I do, but they don't need to, like they've
Yeah.
got their way of doing things. Um, I think one thing that's different with me and Matt that I know for sure is I like to use insulin with guys
Okay.
in the off season. I know that he doesn't. Um, but for the most part, I would say that since I've gotten contact with Matt, been in that environment and just around that. It's probably reshaped how I've done things. I got into things from a very, evidence-based background. And that's where me not having experience as a bodybuilder, I didn't have that exposure to like real life things happening and like
Yeah.
stuff that might not make sense on paper or, might not be shown on paper still works. And probably Matt's brought some of that in. I know that he's also kind of taught me like, hey, don't need to stress over this or like that
Okay.
small thing. But then there's also still some things I do. Like I'll have people do salt packets when we get into
Okay.
peak week and stuff that, have 200 milligrams per packet. So I know exactly how much. I know Matt does like cranks on a salt shaker.
Yeah.
But again, like there's everybody's got their own way of doing stuff. But I would say like if you really broke it down, there's probably a lot of similarities that you could pick apart and recognize across the board with all of us.
Okay.
And
Nice.
like our beliefs and morals and standards, I think is where that foundation is really built upon. And then
Yeah.
our processes kind of stem off to lead us back to that same place.
Nice. You were talking about like stuff that you found were overkill and some stuff that work really, really well in the not industry, but in the fitness world and mostly like contest prep. Do you feel like there's one thing you can think about that's like way overdone or that a lot of people do that you feel is completely unnecessary? And on the flip side, something that more people should maybe do.
Yeah. Let me think. So I know the things that people should do, and I think more people are doing it now too. Like I've been doing this long enough now that I feel like I can see trends of the industry,
Yeah,
which is cool because that wasn't what things were like when I first got into it. But I feel like a lot more people now are using a logbook and being more aware of their performance. And understanding too that like, hey, it's not always just go off of feel. It's like you're still an athlete too,
yeah.
and your performance indicates a lot of how things are going for us. Um, it's one that might be overkill.
Could even be like a product that's used that you feel is not necessary or a supplement or whatever.
Yeah, I think honestly drugs can be pretty overkill
Okay.
sometimes with certain people, especially like it's one thing to, really blast drugs when the time is right and when everything else is right and you're doing all the things that you need to be doing, but it's something I think can easily be like you can jump the gun on and kind of use as a crutch, but most people don't realize that like it doesn't work that great of a crutch when you're not doing all the other things
Okay.
right. Um, I would say that that's one thing that's overkill. I know one thing I used to do that was overkill was I would be very particular about like watching potassium levels during a peak week.
Okay.
Whereas and like where that ratio is and keeping that consistent. And now more so I just kind of have awareness of what their baseline levels are. And if
Okay.
things start getting funky or there's a weird trend I can't figure out, I'll resort back to looking at where potassium is or if there's a certain diuretic that's sparing potassium, maybe where values have trended with that. But yeah, I feel like usually I'd be able to come up with some overkill things, but off the top of my head, I'm blanking.
Okay, good. Um, as far as Blake being at your place, and with that being any athlete, do you feel like when someone comes to your place, you're usually positively surprised, or you're like, oh shit, he doesn't look as good as I thought he would? Or
That
it
was my
really,
first question when I got there. That's
really, eh?
exactly what I,
He probably thought you were ugly in person.
yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Nah, no, I think the people that have came here, they're usually at that like 7 to 14 day out mark.
Yeah.
So they're not looking their greatest at that point in
No.
regards to just like pop and like life to the physique anyways. But I don't expect them to come in looking like stage ready off the airplane.
Yeah.
Um, for the most part, I would say better.
Yeah.
Because Blake's the third, so I'm trying to think. The first was Trevor Birch, and I remember he's the one that won nationals as a light heavy. And I remember seeing him pose, and within like the first day or two that he was down here, I remember like going to the bedroom and telling my wife afterwards, like, damn, this kid might like win the overall at nationals. Like, I don't know if I'm crazy for saying that because he's a light heavy and he ended up doing it. I remember seeing Nick Justice, he was the men's physique guy that just came through, seeing him in person, and I knew that he was big, just
Yeah.
because his weight. But seeing him in person, I was like, yeah, you're pretty, pretty big fella.
Yeah.
And then Blake, he actually looked leaner in person,
Yeah.
which I'd kind of seen it. I just think he's changed so fast over the last
Yeah.
4 to 5 days that his last check-in he sent like the day before he left to getting here, he changed. So everybody so far has looked better in person.
Okay. And does that make you kind of change what you might have planned for the next few days? Or you're like, oh, we're gonna stay on track with that? Or you're like, oh shit, it's not what I imagined in a positive way. So you kind of change things a bit?
Yeah, I mean, as a coach at this point of a prep, you kind of have, at least for me, I know that what we're doing now is setting us up for where we're
Yeah.
going to be in the next couple of days. And so you kind of always are thinking a couple of days ahead
Yeah.
of where you currently are. And so with Blake, I think when he got here, I kind of realized like, okay, we're going to be able to feed you, probably tomorrow and get you fed back up. And then that kind of sets up the next couple days from there. I was probably expecting that we were going to need to push maybe a couple more days or push a little bit harder, but I think his physique is in a place where, again, we were able to feed him. We'll see how you respond coming out of this and how long
Yeah.
it takes to clear your refeed. But I think we'll be able to probably pull back a little bit more than I thought we would leading into the peak week and throughout.
Do you think that
Blake's
not?
trying not to smile. He's
Yeah, he's
hell
like, oh, a
yeah.
refeed. More food. Do you think
Today's
that?
been a lot of food. Like I'm at
Yeah,
like 850 grams of carbs, and I still have another meal.
that's good.
So this might be like I was trying to think like other than maybe like a disgusting like cheat day or something, this might be like the most calories I've ever eaten in a day.
That's
Which
nice.
is not, it's so nice at this point in prep, but that's what I'm excited to see because like I said before, like I've never really had even like a chance like even through peak week and stuff to actually get my physique to peak like and to be full and to be fresh. Like I think every show I've done, in the past, I've always kind of like not had that pop. And
Yeah,
like for me anyways, I know like I can get like good roundness, but if I lose that, then it just and like anybody's like this too, right? If you look flat, you look less conditioned, you just look like a worse version of yourself. So I think it's really nice that, because originally Cam and I's plan was to do Atlanta, which is six
Yeah, and
weeks.
then he goes, "Hey man, you lose 6 weeks on the timeline."
I said, hey
Jesus,
man,
Blake.
I was like, listen, Brandon already
nice.
pissing me off on social media. Like we gotta do Toronto. So no, I just like, it was like it being in the backyard kind of thing. Like, there's a lot of like positives to doing it. And I know Cam, he did exactly what we've been talking about on this podcast. He was like,
Yeah.
let's wait and see,
Yeah,
And I told him like, from my own experience, like I always peak like on time. Like if you looked at my physique, Julian, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, I obviously have sent you pictures and
yeah,
stuff. Like you probably would be like, I don't know, man. Like you're
yeah.
gonna have to really push it. But once I get into shape,
It just starts
then it just
changing so
goes
quick.
quicker and quicker
Yeah,
and quicker. And now, like, I think it's really cool because like we have the opportunity to actually like feed now to like really kind of see what my physique will look like, hopefully,
yeah, for
when I do
sure.
compete, and then also hold on to more size instead of having to over diet into this show. So yeah, I think I'm super stoked about like
We
the
were at like the 5 week out mark, and I remember him sending a check, and I was at this little like car meet because I remember it in particular, and I was just like, fuck. Like we
no,
only
I know
got
what you
like
said. You said
we only
exactly.
got 6 weeks. And I was like, bro, I was like, I don't know, man. He was like, I'm telling you, I changed a lot over this time period. And he was like, I'll kill it. I don't want to have a plan B because I don't want to be weak minded. And I was like, motherfucker. Like, I was just like, okay, just don't register for the show until you get down here in person. Because if it wouldn't have worked, I would have told you at a week out, like, hey, bro, like, I'm not sending you on stage looking soggy. Like, it's just not
The
happening.
message was like, if your ass is fat 2 weeks out, we're not doing Toronto. And I was like, and then I kind of went back and forth on it. I think I messaged him back the next day and I was like, I can do this. Like we're gonna get it done kind of thing. Like I can't really give myself that 1 foot in, 1 foot out type of
Yeah, no,
mentality.
for
So
no, for
uh
sure. Like you want to go in with the mindset that that's the show you're doing. Because if you know you can do another one 6 weeks later,
yeah, you're kind of
you're
like,
like,
And
oh
I
fuck
knew
yeah,
that too. So I was
yeah,
like, shit, all right, no plan B, bro. I was like, just don't sign up to the for the show yet.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you're still not signed up for it, by the way.
No, I was gonna say we gotta remember to
yeah.
sign up
Still have
again.
time to change.
That's something I would do too.
Yeah. Do you feel that not seeing someone in person, and that's going to kind of bring us a bit to the Matt and Quinton situation, but that not seeing someone in person can make you push too much? Because, like, as you're saying, like, you were thinking Blake would have needed to push more for a few days, right? But now you're seeing him and you're like, oh shit, we're going to feed him more probably. So do you feel like this could lead to, like, not making the right call, if that makes sense?
I definitely think it's possible. With Blake, I think it was just he leaned out so fast
Yeah.
over the like last 3 days that I wasn't expecting that. I don't think it was necessarily seeing in person, although like
Okay.
your lighting was washed out in your home check-ins, but that's why I started getting you to send me photos in 3 different lightings. You know what I mean? To give more perspective. And I definitely think it's like Quentin's somebody that he's got such round muscle bellies that it's he's gonna look impressive in a lot of different forms, especially through a
Yeah.
phone. And some of those physiques, they don't come alive over the phone like they will in person. And especially, I don't think I've ever seen Quentin pose in person either. But if I hadn't seen a physique like that in person, it's sometimes hard to grasp, at least for me, sometimes what it truly looks like. You see
Yeah.
some people's physiques that are, they look good in photos, and you see them up close and personal posing, and it's like, whoa, like you're pretty impressive looking in person, you
Yeah.
know? And I think some of those again that he's got such good muscle bellies, he's got a great core. He probably had glute lines, 10 pounds ago that, were shaping out really well, that it could be easy for, things to look good a lot of the time because he did come in a little flat and not at his fullest and biggest, but like still looks good. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you see him
Yeah.
posing by himself, like he's still super impressive. So I think it's very possible. And it was one of those things where it was like, I know Blake's someone that probably could afford to fly down here. I knew he's somebody that would have comfortable being in the house with me, and I knew it'd give us opportunity to get better. So I was just like, screw it. Like this is what I got this posing room for.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. I'm actually glad that you're touching on like Blake being able to afford flying
Hmm.
down there, because the reality is most pros and even just amateurs don't have a big income, right? Do
Hmm.
you feel like some of your guys might have been held back because of like financial aspect? You've ever experienced that, or it's not really something you've came across?
No, I mean, I think so because I think it can even boil down to, hey, I need to wait until I get paid again to get blood work done. And that's another
Yeah.
2 to 3 weeks. And, if that happens, and again, this is like probably something overkill to say, but like those little things add up. Let's say
Yeah.
that happens a couple times throughout the year. That's 6 to 8 weeks on drugs you could be losing.
Yeah.
Or pushing something back, or maybe let's say someone's in prep and they need to get T3 but like they can't source it, or their source is super expensive, or whatever it may be, and they can't get something for a couple weeks. Like I think it definitely has the potential to hinder somebody. Think about someone not being able to hire a good posing coach because they can't afford it. You have people that are going to argue that pharmacy grade growth hormone is better than generics. I've
Yeah.
seen generics like definitely slow down fat loss and cause people to halt in preps. That could be a couple weeks loss as you're trying to figure out why someone's not dropping. Um, so I think for sure, it definitely can make a big difference because again, the higher you go within this sport, the bigger the small details matter.
Yeah.
And so I think when it comes to finances, that's where, you pay for quality with a lot of things that might only be very minuscule differences, but they add up.
And is that a conversation you have with guys before they start a prep, or it just like, I'm not going to talk about it, and if it becomes an issue, then we'll address it?
Yeah, you can, because you can kind of pick up when it starts to become an issue. Like, let's say you get someone's blood work back. I have a questionnaire that I'll have people fill out when they send me their lab work. And it's, the first question on there is like, list out any supplements that you're not taking that I have on your list.
Okay.
And so out the gate there, it's like, okay, why are you not taking these supplements? Oh, I couldn't afford it, or I was just being lazy. But if it's like you can't afford it, then, I might start to notice like, oh, I just ran out of drugs. Like, why didn't you order enough? And you can kind of just tell kind of where people are at in life and financially as well
Yeah.
sometimes. And just make it like sometimes when I'm taking someone into a prep that I truly don't know, or I'm still kind of getting to know, yeah, I'll ask questions like, okay, do you have anything big coming up this year? Maybe like, okay, when are finals for school? Let's make sure that we're not putting you in peak week while you're in final week. Or, do you have any big job changes, or are you moving, or, any vacations planned? And sometimes, like our finances in a good spot, fall into that role as well. And so I think you kind of understand. And, when I'm working with someone that might be in their early 20s, like I try and teach a lot of those younger guys out the gate, like, this is an expensive hobby.
Yeah.
Like, don't get into this to make a career out of it. And probably those things can come up too.
Okay. Nice. Blake, did you have questions on the Q&A?
I had a couple of questions on the Q&A, but I don't know if I send them to you too, Julian. I remember
Sure.
one off the top of my head, and it's pretty simple, but it was a question for Cam, and it was just how. or it was a vegetable question. So it was how many meals do you have veggies in for athletes in prep? And do you prescribe a certain weight? And do you prescribe a certain vegetable, or is it pretty open-ended?
Very
What?
specific. Yeah, I would say, because the deeper someone gets into prep, I'll probably start putting some more veggies in just to try and help with satiety. Um, but I don't know, probably 3 out of their meals are having veggies in them, anywhere from probably 50 to 100 grams. Could be anything from green beans, zucchini, asparagus, lettuce, peppers. Um, yeah.
I I know, like, listen, I put the Q&A out like an hour before we did the podcast. So, like, the pickings are not that great. There was
Okay.
another one too, but I
Did
don't
that
know if
guy
you,
ask about weighing out cream of rice and water?
yeah, Cam and I have this guy that messages us like here and
What?
there about how much water to put in cream of
Bro,
rice.
he asked us
But
like
like
four
it goes insane. Like he continuously like brings it
paragraphs.
up and he's like, is it gonna
Really?
cause like stomach distress? And then I'd be like, okay, just use this amount, and then he'll come back later and like say, like, what if like I saw Wesley Vissers using this much?
Oh my God.
Crazy, crazy.
Insane. Okay,
Um,
I
yeah,
had
there
one
was only
about
one. There was only one other one I had, and it was basically like again, probably a question. I mean, we probably all know, but it was with Chris Bumstead in his off seasons. Does he need to run like a substantial amount of gear, whatever you consider a substantial amount of gear? And if not, why not?
Do I coach C-ball?
I
And
I
and
mean,
again, like that's like I don't know, maybe even Julian, you want to answer?
mean, I know the answer. Um, I don't know if you want to go about it, Cam, though.
I mean, I would just say, like I said, I've heard that he doesn't use a lot of
Yeah.
gear, and I think for an individual to reach a certain level of size, they're going to need to take more gear than they'll need to maintain it. So probably not needing a
Yeah.
lot.
The
Yeah.
follow-up to that was outside of like, those top guys, is there like are the guys at the top level person by person taking more gear than somebody at a lower level competition, like in general?
I would say they're probably taking less than the guy placing third at nationals, and that's been placing
Yeah.
third for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you got to think, guys, like there's not many, like Sebum's somebody that he's won what 4 or 5 titles at this point. He's
Five.
at the
Yeah.
top of his weight cap. Like he's got to continue just to refine himself, but he's not trying to force his elevation, a ton higher than where he is. You know what I mean? He's not trying to break into new barriers and move up placings and move from losses to wins. He's kind of like in a maintenance period, and I just think naturally in general, the sport of bodybuilding, there's not a lot of people that have reached a point where they're not just continually wanting to like exponentially drive progress. You know what I mean? Like it's very rare that you see someone get to a point where they almost have to just maintain who they are throughout an off season. And again, Julian had a good point. Like those people that continually keep coming in third and losing, like I guarantee them off-season cycles just keep getting heavier and heavier after each loss.
Yeah. Yeah, and for Chris also, like there's the weight cap thing, but it's also health related, right? Like he needs to make sure that his body inflammation is as low as it can be when he starts prep. Because if he runs like high doses all of season, well, he won't even be able to make it through his prep. Like he's already there, so he doesn't need to push more, as Cam said. But it's also he needs to make sure that his prep is going to go as smooth as possible in terms of him being able to go on for one more year and one more year. Because it's always, well, we're going to see where my health is at right now, and we're going to see if we do another year. So obviously that time off really helps clean the body and clear everything, right?
Mhm.
Um,
So next week on Wednesday, we're gonna be at my place. maybe if Cam doesn't hate this so much, we can get him back on
Yeah, for
for a
sure.
quick chat.
Well, maybe it won't be because you're going to be doing the Atlanta show
Yeah, the Atlanta
instead.
show tomorrow night. That's what everyone's saying. They're like, is there a show in Atlanta like going on right
Yeah,
now?
no, in five
You
weeks.
don't want those Georgia judges.
Um, I had one question come through the Q&A, and it's super vague, but I kind of want to see where you're gonna go with that. And it was like, how do you, and I know what I would answer, but it was just like, how do you go about peak week with an athlete? Obviously, there's going to be stuff that's case by case, but there's also like knowing Matt, knowing how he preps. I'm guessing you kind of do some similar stuff. There's also things that are done with pretty much anyone, and then those things are going to be adjusted
Sure.
based on
Yeah,
response.
no, I think I can answer this. So going into the peak week, there's things that I like to be aware of. I like to know an average of how much they're flushing from PM to AM. I like to have baselines established with their fluid intake. I told you I use those salt packets, so I'll have electrolytes, like a baseline for where sodium is. I like to have awareness of, okay, if this athlete's in a flat point, how much do I need to feed them to bring them back out of it? So that way I have some understanding and some groundwork to work from when it comes to loading them. For anybody, I think that there's two main components to a peak week. The first one is just reducing stress and inflammation. Depending on how ready you are, to really kind of dictates how early you get to do that. But before you really start to load a body up, fill them out, and then kind of refine their look as you go into the show. Like you've got to bring that body to a de-stressed state, especially if they're going to digest that food well and get the inflammation down. I would say, from a peaking aspect, I probably can speak the most on how similar probably Matt and I do things. Um, you know, let's say we're talking about a male bodybuilder that's going into a loading period at 2 days out. Uh, you know, there's probably some type of depletion period enough, even if the athlete's ready, but just simply to bring carbs down to get fluid off. So that way at that 2 day out mark, they're waking up in a dry point. So that way we can load food in, probably having some kind of reduction in fluids from what we've been doing a couple days prior. So that way we can bring food up while still keeping weight relatively close to what their normal PM weight is. Then waking up at 1 day out at probably a new low, or if not a new low, close to the same as the old one, even though we just refed hard the day before, unless you've got a body that's just been super dead. And then, as you trend into Friday, probably letting some fluid clear off in the morning, working them to a drier point, maybe pushing the food up a little bit into the evening once they're in that drier spot, and then increasing sodium at that point to kind of hold hydration within the muscle. And I mean, fluids are probably getting pretty low at that point, anywhere from maybe 6 ounces with a meal down to like 60 milliliters with a meal. You know how it is.
Yeah,
Um, and so, with females, I like to load things up a little bit more earlier into the week and kind of just
okay,
smoothly take them in, at least for probably bikini and wellness, just
yeah,
because you're not pushing such high amounts of food into high amounts of muscle mass, nor are trying to really dry them out to a certain extent, as you would a
yeah,
male. Um, so I'd say with a female, it's probably a little bit more linear across the board and kind of just playing up and down like this
yeah,
and floating them in. Um, What's something else I like to do? Oh, at 3 days out, like for example, let's say if my 2 day out is my big loading point, and maybe someone's fluids at 7 liters per day. We go into 3 days out, I'll reduce it to five. And then what I'll do is I'll have them take their weight before every single meal. So that way, when I go into 2 days out, I can see what their weight trends are like from meal to meal when I reduce fluid. And I know when I'm pushing food on 2 days out, if I can keep their body weight somewhat similar to where they are the day prior, but we're keeping food in today, they're going to be dry when they wake up on Friday.
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Um, and it just kind of, again, like we're probably wanting to shoot near that same PM weight. So that kind of just keeps me in a position to like, if we're usually 220 on wake up and maybe 222 by meal three, and we're like 226 by meal three when we're loading, like unless the physique is looking good, I probably need to pull back on how much food we're
Yeah.
pushing. Um, but yeah.
Okay.
Speaking
And
of food, I got bacon in my next meal, so it's getting close
really,
to 8:30 here.
you got
And my
bacon.
next meal is incredible. And I'm taking up the kitchen space right now. So I think we should,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
we're gonna wrap it up. Cam, are you still taking clients?
Yeah, no, for
Yes.
sure I am. I mean,
So
it all just kind of comes down to the timeline and where they're at
yeah.
and make
So
sure we're on the same page.
if anyone's interested, how is it best for them to reach you through social media, email?
Yeah, so my Instagram page, Cameron underscore cheek, and then within that, you'll see a bio, with a link in my bio to just fill out a little intake form and submit that to me. That's probably the most efficient way to get in contact with me. This is tough with Instagram requests. Sometimes you miss them.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the easiest way. Or if you send me an email, cam@camp-jansen.com. That's going to be the easiest way to contact me.
Nice. So if you guys want to be told that you don't have the genetic or the potential to be great, he's your man.
You can
Uh,
expect an email from Julian in there too, Cam, I'm sure.
yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm gonna
For his comeback in 2035.
yeah, I'm gonna have you and Matt in the same email, and I'm gonna asking if you can coach me.
Whichever one says you'll be better, go with.
Yes, exactly. Cam, I'll see you next week. Might have
For
you again
sure.
on the podcast.
Yeah.
And thank you for your time. Good luck with Blake.
Thank you. I
And
appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me on.
thanks for your time, man.
For sure.